Every genre of music has an image. But how far are these people really willing to go to portray that image? For most artists, this merely goes as far as makeup and costume and stage presence. But for some, they tend to take things too far. Whether it be Gigi Allen defecating on stage and mutilating himself during shows, or it's Mayhem, whose story will give you a sense of just how insane some musicians can be. This is the true story of Mayhem. Øystein Arseth was born March 22nd, 1968, in Egersund, Norway, a small town with only about 3,700 people. Now, like a lot of black metal musicians, little is known about his childhood, but what we do know is that from an early age he rebelled against the conventional norms of Egersund. We also know that, like a lot of metalheads, he was very inspired by a lot of metal bands. For him it was bands like Bathory, Hellhammer, later known as Celtic Frost, and most of all, Venom. Venom were a band from Newcastle, England, who also rebelled against the conventional norms that they felt trapped in. But they were trying to break away from society. They were trying to break away from metal. But we're not talking about them. The point is, their music was very influential on Øystein, with their harsh sound and satanic overtone, especially on their second album, titled Black Metal. So when he started his own band, he called it Mayhem, named after the Venom song, Mayhem with Mercy. Along with Øystein, Mayhem was started by drummer Kjetil Manheim, stage name Manheim, and bassist Bjorn Stubberud, stage name Necrobutcher. Øystein was the guitarist, and his stage name was originally Destructor, but he later changed it to Urana. They had multiple different vocalists over the years, but overall they were really building a name for themselves. And it was only a matter of time before everyone in Norway was talking about Mayhem, and black metal in general. But this wasn't in a good way. Throughout this time, they also released their first EP in 1987, titled Death Crush, with their vocalist at the time, Sven Erik Christensen, stage name Maniac. And while the songs in this EP were definitely abrasive, this was only the beginning. In 1988, Manheim left the band, and was replaced by Jan Axel Blomberg, stage name Hellhammer. Maniac would also decide to leave the band. His replacement was Per Yngve Ulle, also known as Pelle by his peers, and his stage name, Dead. Now, this is where things get crazy. But first, let's talk about Dead some more. As I said, his real name is Per Yngve Ulle. Per was from Stockholm, Sweden, and in 1986 he started his own black metal band, which he called Morbid. And like I also stated, his stage name was Dead. Morbid only released one demo with Dead titled December Moon when he was 18. And although he was just barely entering adulthood, he was clearly a very competent vocalist. But after this demo was released in 1987, Dead felt that Morbid wasn't really going anywhere, and he wanted to be part of something that was more established. And that's when he found the ad that Mayhem was looking for a new vocalist. And so what he did next might shock you. He sent them a package that contained the Morbid demo, a letter stating his plans for the future, and a decomposing rat on a cross. Another really odd thing about this package, it said that it came from Transylvania instead of Stockholm, Sweden, which is where he was actually from. But despite all this, Mayhem really liked the demo. They thought Dead was perfect for Mayhem. So in 1988, when he was only 20 years old, he packed up all his stuff and moved from Stockholm, Sweden to Norway, where they were from. But once Dead got there and he became their official vocalist, it didn't take long for the rest of the band to fully realize how strange Dead really was as a person. He was completely obsessed with death. He'd sniff dead animals in paper bags and sleep with dead birds under his bed so he could smell death. He'd bury his clothes in the dirt and dig them up before shows and wear them so he could smell like death. Like, he was completely obsessed with the idea of dying. And all this boiled down to his mental health issues that the band noticed and was understandably concerned about. Pele had a lot of issues, from the antisocial behavior that I just mentioned to just being downright very depressed. And because of this, he wouldn't just do the aforementioned methods of smelling death. He also self-harmed, both on stage and just around his friends, which obviously made them very concerned for him and his mental health. All but Euronymous, who was actually fascinated by Pele's behavior, and in fact actually encouraged him to continue self-harming. According to people who knew Dead and Euronymous personally, they would get on each other's nerves a lot, to the point they would torment each other, and supposedly, at one point, Dead actually stabbed Euronymous, but that is unconfirmed, whether that actually happened or not. But what we do know is that these two did not get along at all, and that Euronymous actually started most of these arguments. And the worst part is that Euronymous, a lot of the time, would actually try pressuring Dead into unaliving himself, which, unfortunately, he would go through with. Per Yngve Oven, January 16th, 1969 to April 8th, 1991. That day, Dead was left alone in the house that him, Euronymous, and Hellhammer were all living in together at the time. And he decided that now was the moment he would take his own life. First, he decided that his method would be to slit open his wrists and bleed out. But when that was taking too long, he decided that he would instead just shoot himself in the head with a shotgun. Before he did all this, though, he left a note. And while I don't know exactly what the note all said, I do have a couple parts written down that I will read off to you. The note read the following: "Excuse the blood," as well as statements such as, "I belong in the woods, and have always done so. No one will understand the reason for this, anyway. To give some semblance of an explanation, I'm not a human. This is just a dream, and soon I will awake." Clearly he needed help, but unfortunately, like a lot of people, he didn't have that. And it didn't help that he was living with Euronymous, someone who was very toxic to him, to the point of encouraging him to cut himself and actually pressured him towards this decision. But what happened next is just completely messed up. Euronymous was the first one to find Pele's body. But instead of being upset or shocked, he was pleasantly surprised at the sight. And so before calling the police, he went out and purchased a disposable camera from a store, came back and took pictures of the gruesome scene. And the next day, he called up Hellhammer, the bassist, and told him everything. This was their conversation. "Pele's gone home," said Euronymous. "Gone home? To Sweden?" asked Necrobutcher. "No, he's done something really cool. He killed himself." And that's when Euronymous proceeded to tell Necrobutcher about the photos and how he was planning on using them as an album cover. But Necrobutcher, actually being sane, proceeded to tell Euronymous that he is to not call him anymore until he has destroyed the photos, which Euronymous told him that he would, but of course he did not. And he actually proceeded to use one of those photos as the cover for Mayhem's bootleg live album, Dawn of the Black Hearts. In response, Necrobutcher promptly left Mayhem. Now, the photo of Pele's body that Euronymous took is very easy to find online. You don't have to do much to find it. But I strongly recommend you do not look it up, as it is a very real photo of a human being right after they slit open their arms and shot themselves in the head with a shotgun. It is very gruesome, very, very gory. So I do not recommend you look it up if you cannot stomach that, or even if you can't stomach it, I don't recommend you look at it. I have seen it, but it is not a pleasant sight. Now, Euronymous wasn't done with just exploiting the photos of his dead bandmates. He proceeded to go on record and tell all of Mayhem's fans that the reason Dead shot himself was because black metal was becoming too successful and commercial, which is a complete lie. In fact, Pele, like most musicians, wanted Mayhem to be successful. He wanted his music to do well. Euronymous just wanted to convince the world that black metal was something worth dying over. With his newfound notoriety, Euronymous opened a record store that he named Helvete, Norwegian for hell. This store doubled as his record label, Death Like Silence Productions, and as a meeting ground for like-minded musicians to come and hang out, in which Euronymous actually found new band members. Guitarist Snorre Ruch, stage name Blackthorn, vocalist Attila Sehar, no stage name, and bassist Varg Vikernes, no stage name. By 1992, they had a full lineup again, but little did they know just how messed up things would get later down the line. Varg Vikernes, born Christian Vikernes, created the one-man group known as Burzum in 1991, when he was just 18 years old. And in 1992, he released his self-titled project under that name, showing right away how talented he was at 19 years old. At this time also, Euronymous became the leader of a black metal inner circle, in which he found Varg through, and made him the bassist for Mayhem in 1992. Euronymous then proceeded to make a list of rules that you had to follow to be part of this black metal inner circle. One of those rules is you had to be a Satanist. It didn't even matter what kind of metal you made. If you worshipped the devil, he'd consider you part of the black metal scene. He stated the following: if a band cultivates and worships Satan, it's black metal. In a way, it can just be ordinary heavy metal, or just noise. What's important is that it's satanic. That's what makes it black metal. He also had a rule that listeners of Mayhem must be worthy, and believed that some people who were listening to black metal shouldn't be because they weren't to him. He stated the following: there's a big demand for the album, and it has gone for 1,500 krone on the black market. We feel the album was first released only to 20 to 30% of people who deserved it. The rest of those people who got to own it are a bunch of idiots. At this point, Euronymous' ego was at an all-time high. He had a cult leader-like status with loads of people willing to follow these guidelines. There's also a lot of people criticizing him and thinking he's nothing more than just one big egomaniac. Varg included. While Varg worked and associated with Euronymous, there was allegedly a power struggle brewing between them. Euronymous ran his own store, his own record label, and he was the leader of Mayhem and the black metal inner circle. He had a lot of power, which Varg wanted, but he had nothing to go up against Euronymous with. In 1992, Varg Vikernes burned down almost a dozen churches, and even used a picture of one of them after he burnt it down on Burzum's 1993 EP, Aske, Norwegian for ashes, in which the first 1,000 copies came with a lighter. Also in 1992, Bald Galdvik Uthen, stage name Bast, who was the drummer for Thorns and Emperor, was responsible for the murder of a man after visiting a bar one night, all because he wanted to know what it was like to stab someone to death. Varg then proceeded to do an interview with a Norwegian newspaper, taking credit for all these crimes, including the murder that he had no part in, all while keeping his identity anonymous. He was going under the pseudonym, The Count. The reason he did this was he wanted to promote black metal to the masses. And it worked, just not as planned. Euronymous was forced to shut down Helvete, and Varg was arrested under suspicion of the crimes along with a few other members of the black metal scene. Things overall were just going downhill. Varg was later released from prison in 1993, and at this point he was completely done with Euronymous. And because of a couple reasons. A year prior they had an argument over money because Varg wasn't being paid for any of Burzum's revenue. And now Euronymous shut down the record store as well as his record label. And now they had no spot for the black metal inner circle to meet up. He stated the following: Euronymous made a complete fool of himself by closing down the shop, and most of us agreed that he was a damn wimp and an idiot. I was angry at him for not taking advantage of the situation, which is why I did that silly interview in the first place, and I didn't want anything more to do with him. As far as I was concerned, he didn't exist anymore. For some months, this dislike for Euronymous spread in the metal scene as more people understood what a moron he was, and he blamed me for all of this. And he started to hate me. He believed it was my fault that people lost their respect for him. In a way, he was right, as I certainly didn't keep my opinions a secret, but he brought that upon himself. He was simply disclosed by the way he reacted to the heat. He made a fool of himself. Further, when the media wrote all that crap about me, it made him feel less important. Suddenly, he was no longer the main character in the hardcore metal scene. As he saw it, that too was my fault. So supposedly at this point, Euronymous wanted to kill Varg. And he stated that he would do so by knocking him out with an electroshock taser, the same kind of security guard uses, drag him to the woods, and record a snuff film of him torturing Varg to death. Well, eventually Varg caught wind of this, and he decided that him and Snor, the guitarist for Mayhem at the time, would drive from Bergen to Oslo, which is where Euronymous lived at the time. Now, it took a few hours to get there, but they did it. It was late at night. Euronymous was supposed to be sleeping, but he didn't want to wait. When he got there, though, things went south. Oystein Aarseth, March 22nd, 1968 to August 10th, 1993. When Varg got there, though, things didn't go how Euronymous saw them going. Varg proceeded to stab Euronymous to death. The final stab being to the head, which was the stab that killed him. Now, if you ask Varg, this was in self-defense. He claimed that Euronymous attacked him first, and him dying was Varg defending himself. But Varg had a couple stories about the night that just don't line up, and he was the one that committed the murder, so it is a very biased source to begin with. But one story claims that it was all in self-defense, but another story claimed that Euronymous tried running away multiple times, which angered Varg at his cowardliness and proceeded to kill him, and didn't feel bad about it. The story that the jury bought, though, was Snor's story, where he claims that Varg intended to kill Euronymous the entire time, and that he pressured Snor into driving him to Oslo to do so. Ultimately, both were sent to prison. Snor was sentenced to 8 years, and Varg was sentenced to 21 years. Varg was released in 2014, and has since changed his name to Louis Cachet, but everyone proceeds to refer to him as Varg Vikernes, because that is the name he is most known as. Mayhem are still going strongly to this day, with Necrobutcher being their only remaining original member. And since 1993, none of the band members have burnt down a church, taken their own life, or taken somebody else's life, as all the band members have a sane state of mind, despite Necrobutcher saying that he initially planned on killing Euronymous himself. But he has not taken anyone's life, he's never been to prison, so that's a good thing. But anyway, guys, that was the true story of Mayhem. If you like this video, leave a like, and maybe subscribe for more, as I plan on doing plenty of videos talking about insane, messed up, dark stories. Not just about metal, just about anything really, like serial killers, hoaxes, anything like that. So I hope you stick around for more. If you want to watch the videos that I watched to research this topic, links to those are in the description below. In fact, they go into a lot more detail than I did here, and mentioned a lot of stuff that I personally omitted. And so I recommend you watch them for more detail on the story if you are interested. Anyway, guys, that's all the time I have left for today. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, everyone.
2 months later, I finally finished editing this thing. I'm probably not going to do videos like this ever again, and if I do, they're going to be short. Jesus Christ, I procrastinated the hell out of this.